You're listening to That's the Hashtag Truth with Daniel and Jenny Muscatell, where we let real people get real honest about the bottom line.
So today we have joining us Erin Ahnfeldt, who teaches English in a public high school. A teacher for more than 2 decades, he is passionate about using his writing and teaching to point to a God who is very much present in the secular and the day-to-day. He earned his Master's of Art in Teaching from Wheaton College and currently lives in Colorado Springs with his wife and 3 kids. In addition to teaching, he writes honest stories to a list of subscribers about the struggles and beauty of being a Christian teacher in a public school. Erin, welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, you guys.
Yeah, we are so glad to have you here. It's definitely an honor to be able to talk to you today. I have read over some of the stories on your website, and you are a beautiful writer.
Oh, thank you for that. I appreciate that.
But let me just first say, wow, over 2 decades of teaching, my goodness, the amount of kids and teachers and parents and staff that you've had the opportunity to get to know over the past couple of decades. All I can think is, oh my word, the stories you must indeed have. And I want to hear a lot more about those, but can I first just ask, what brought you to teaching?
That's a great question. I can't believe it is incredible to me to think about being in teaching for almost 30 years. It just seems like we were just talking about this before we started recording, but it just seems like time flies by. It goes so fast. It just seems like a couple of years ago, I walked into a classroom for the first time, praying desperately for God to carry me through in front of all those teenagers, asking God, please help me with this, because I was so afraid and so overwhelmed. And God has been faithful for all those years. And you're right, there are so many stories that I love to tell on that website, because God is good and He does great things in the hallways and the classrooms of the school where I work. So I want people to see that and celebrate just what He's doing. But strangely enough, you asked me about how I started teaching. The first time I got the idea of teaching was through a movie. It goes way back, and this is kind of crazy. You guys know Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So a friend of mine, when we were seniors in high school, we went to see Kindergarten Cop, Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I remember it.
Yes. And so
Yeah.
it's a great movie about this guy who is, I think he's like FBI or something. He's trying to take down drug dealers, and he's muscle bound, and he's very manly, and he's tough, and then he's given an assignment to be a teacher in a kindergarten classroom, and he thinks, oh, I got this, no problem. And so he goes into that kindergarten classroom, and he's overwhelmed, and it's crazy, and these kids are hilarious. But he falls in love with them, and they love him, and it really made being a teacher seem just exciting and challenging and beautiful. Yeah. And so that's where it just kind of hit me at first, where the thought of maybe teaching. But then I went to college, and I was thinking of being a lawyer, and I took my first political science class, and I thought, no way, I'm not doing this. There's no way I'm going to be a lawyer. But I went to a Christian school, Wheaton College in Illinois, and had a professor named Dr. Lundeen who he was magical in the classroom. He would bring up topics that had to do with secular works of literature that we were looking at. He was an English professor. Mm-hmm. And we would talk about man's search for meaning and the desperate need that man has to have community and be loved. And we'd have these discussions that were just rich. And he would pace the classroom and take off his glasses and get real close to a student and ask a question, and would get all of us going, talking. And I just remember thinking, this guy is incredible. And he was a pastor before he became an English professor. So he just knew how to stir up our hearts and get us excited and stir up wonder in books. And I thought, man, what if I did that in a classroom? What if I could talk about our lives and our stories and our struggles in a classroom as we looked at a book, or as we looked at literature? Mm-hmm. And it just got me excited. So I started going down that track. And the more I prayed about it, the more God confirmed that teaching was something He wanted me to do. Yeah. But it's kind of crazy because I'm an introvert, and I recharge being on my own by myself. So in front of people, I get very overwhelmed, and I can feel, exhausted by the end. And so sort of an enigma. It's sort of crazy that God would call me into this place of being with lots of people. And still, that could be overwhelming. That could be very overwhelming. But looking back, I can totally see God puts us in places that are hard because he wants us to lean on him and need him. So yeah, so that now I'm here 27 years later, thankful that God has me where I am and still doing it.
Do you find it easier as time's gone on? Because, being an introvert, that's not something you can change, but like, has that, okay, I'm getting in front of the classroom every day. And at first that felt intimidating, but now you're 30 years in, does it get easier?
It definitely, I think it gets a little easier. I think I'm still in the place that I think God originally intended me for me to be, because teenagers can still be scary to me and still be overwhelming. And I
Me
think
too, everybody. Do you have any teenagers of your own?
I do. I have three of them actually. Yeah, one of them just turned 14. So yeah, I've got three of them. So yeah, so they're all amazing, and I'm thankful for them. And I got to clarify too. Teenagers are awesome. I love hanging out
I
with
know,
them.
me too. I agree.
Right. There's so much life that they have to offer, and they're just spontaneous, and they love community and being honest. And so I just love being with the teenagers. But yeah, it has, I think it's gotten a little easier, but there's still a place where I need God. I just need his help to get me through. And especially when we went through COVID and, that time where we're just wondering how we're going to do this online. And so, yeah, I'm in a place where I still need him, which is good, which I think is a good thing. Yeah, but it has gotten a little bit easier, and it's cool because when good things do happen in the classroom and community is built, I get to step back and be like, that was not me. There's no way that was me. That's God at work. So
Wow.
the cool thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now you talk about him being present in the day to day, and I mean, he is present all the time, right? Zephaniah 3:17, the Lord your God is in your midst. But how does that play out? How do you, like, do you have an example of how you see him show up in the classroom?
Sure. Yeah. One of the stories that I've told that's in my blog is the story of a girl named Eolani. She came to my room. She was in my first period class. She came to my room just before the bell rang, and as she walked in, she was a mess. She was just in tears, and you could see she was broken up about something, and just a wreck. And so she said, "Can I go for a minute and kind of catch my breath and not be late to class?" And I said, "Sure, take a walk, go to the bathroom, kind of gather yourself." And so she left. And then I walked away, and this happens all the time. Kids, I mean, we all have different stories, and we're all in different places in life. And when you bring all these lives together in one classroom, 35 people, we're all in different places. Some of us are excited and happy and doing great, and others are broken and hurting. And it's just all of our stories collide in one, in one class period. So she's hurting, and we start class, the bell rings, we start class. And after a while, she comes in, and she's got some Kleenex, and she's kind of drying her eyes and gathering herself, and we start class. Well, the lesson that I had for that day was about developing a paragraph, and how to develop a paragraph with a topic sentence and your quotes and your evidence, and then your commentary explaining the quote. And I had one particular example from one of my students that I loved, and I wanted to use it as an example for them to look at. And I'd used it the day before. We were on a block schedule. And so the day before, I'd already used this with some other classes, and then this day I was going to use it with this class. And I'd had this lesson set up to do for a while. So, and I'd taken the name off of the paragraph. I'd printed it out and taken the name off the paragraph so no one would know who wrote it. And I had forgotten who wrote the paragraph. I just had this example here, and I figured I'll find it because I was still grading those paragraphs, and I was going to find it and know who wrote it. But it didn't really matter because this was a paragraph I wanted everybody to look at. So anyways, we start talking about the paragraph, and I'm talking about, hey, this is one that I want you to look at. It's great. There's some great sentences in here, and imagery that the student used is really cool, and it makes it engaging. And as I'm talking about it, Eolani starts to smile a little bit, like kind of a shy smile. And I'm thinking, why is she smiling like that? All of a sudden she's smiling. She was just hurting and upset. So then I pass out the paragraphs to all the kids, and then they all have their own copy of it. And then I say, now get in partners, and I want you guys to talk about this paragraph. And I had a student teacher at the same time who was also a believer, and she was in there watching me teach the class. and kind of learning, and she's excited about, and she actually now teaches. She's got a full-time job, and she got a great job, but she was excited about being a Christian in public school, and I walked up to her and I said, I think that paragraph might be Aolani's paragraph. And she smiles and she's, I think it is, because we just kind of whisper as they're talking in groups, as they're talking to their partners. And then the more they're talking, I can see her getting more and more animated and laughing and talking with her partner, and they're both smiling as they're reading it. And I can tell it's confirmed. This is definitely her paragraph. And so then I went to the student teacher and I said, God does this all the time. He is always at work doing little things to love these kids in ways that I never could. And by the end of the class, then we came back together as a group, and I said, well, what did you guys see that you liked in the paragraph? And they started talking, and Aolani, with every comment, she's like getting more and more bright and lifted up. And then I'm like hamming it up a little more, saying, yeah, I'm not going to tell you whose paragraph this is, Aolani. And they're all, by the end, they know it's hers, and she's like excited. And by the end of class, she leaves and she's smiling, she's pumped. I mean, just amazing. And that's the kind of thing God does all the time, where you can tell he sees those kids in ways that I can't, and he knows what they're dealing with, and he loves them. And it's a privilege to watch that happen every day.
That's incredible. And it's funny the way you say, in the end, God sees those kids, because when you were talking about it and you're talking about this young girl and she's having a hard day, and then all of a sudden a smile comes across her face because her work is recognized, what she's doing is recognized. And the word that stood out to me was she felt seen.
Amen.
She felt recognized. And so, it's wow. Yes, those little details, and what a gift. To be able for you to see all of that unfolding before your eyes. Have you always had that ability to kind of look at God in the details? Was there like a pivotal moment in your life that sort of keyed you into, hey, notice, look, or I don't know, like, where does that come from?
That's a great question. My mom was and she still is, a big storyteller. She loves to tell stories, and she loves history. And so I think my first answer would be that early on in our childhood, my mom would take us to historical sites, and we'd be like on a battlefield in Virginia and looking at a Civil War site. And she would say things like imagine, like, just stand here and imagine what would be happening in these woods here, and all these men out here, and they're fighting for their lives, brother against brother. And she'd get so into these moments, and we would stand and we'd kind of be in wonder and be in awe and take a minute to like imagine the moment. And so I think the first thing I think of is just that my mom was big on storytelling and the capturing the moment and thinking about the moment, everything that took place in that moment, and just using your mind to think of the wonder of it all. And so I think maybe that's a piece of it, is growing up with that, with a mom who did that. And then I think another piece of it, this is a big part of it, is that when I was in 7th grade, I was bullied really bad. I mean, it was really rough. And I write about this in my book, actually. I was really bullied, and I did not feel seen. I felt like everybody had forgotten me, and that there's no adult there to support me. And it was a rough time, but that gave me a passion to see others and to see kids, and like God sees me, because I think after a while God showed me after that he saw me in the midst of that, and that I wasn't alone, actually. And so I think that's another piece of it, is just the passion to see kids and to see they're hurting and where they're at, and to see them like be a representative of God, and to see them like he does, and try to do that. I mean, obviously I can't ultimately, but to try to see kids the way that he sees them.
And that's, it's beautiful. And even just thinking about your mom telling you all these stories in the battlefield, or you haven't had experiences yourself, it sounds like you and your mom are full of just this great empathy and an ability to walk in someone else's shoes and really, like you said, see them or at least try to understand, right?
Thank you for saying that, Jen. I appreciate that.
Now, you have talked about a little bit in your bio, the struggle of being a Christian teacher in a public school. How does that play out for you on the day-to-day?
Great question. I think so in my classroom we talk about stories. We talk about Fahrenheit 451 and Of Mice and Men and Much
Yes.
Ado About Nothing and all these great stories, novels and plays and Raising the Sun and short stories too that are just engaging. And when we talk about stories, we have to talk about the author of the story and what's the author's purpose here? What's the author trying to do in this story? Right. So why is the author introduce this character? Or why is this conflict here? Or how is he using the setting? Or what is this a symbol or is this not a symbol? This one object that he keeps bringing up, like in A Raising the Sun, constantly bringing up the robe that Asaggai brings in, and that robe kind of represents beneath his identity. And so all these things, what is the author doing here? We talk about that all the time. And what's the author's background and what's the author's heart behind this? And so we're talking about this all the time. And you guys probably can see where this is going. As I'm talking about these things, I'm also talking about these kids' lives. And we talk about what's a conflict in your life that you've gone through and what's an important symbol to you that represents identity. All these different things that we talk about where we talk about their stories. But the one thing we don't talk about when we talk about their stories that we do talk about when we talk about Ray Bradbury's story or Lorraine Hansberry's story or John Steinbeck's story, the one thing we don't talk about is we don't talk about the author of their stories and what he's doing with their lives and that he loves them and that he wants them to find purpose in those stories. And so I think that's the hard part. And that's why I wrote my book about God being the author of our stories is because I want to shout it from the mountaintops that there is a God who is working on our story. And you can see his creativity and you can see the beauty that he brings out of the mess of our lives that demonstrates how close he is to us and how much he cares about the details. But the problem is I can't talk about the author of these kids' stories that loves them and that sees them like God saw Eolani. But I will say this, there is a lot more freedom than most people think being a Christian in public school, because if they ask me where I'm coming from and what I think, I can definitely tell them where I'm coming from and I can talk about my faith because I can say I was at Bible study last night and I have these people that I read the Bible with and I can tell them that I go to church and that I'm a believer and that I believe in God. And I even share my stories with them. I'll put them up on the screen and we'll talk about the writing and my struggle with writing and how I try to put the story together. And so we'll talk about it. I'll put it up there and tell these kids that I just put the story in front of, tell them how they're my heroes and how they demonstrate these things that I wrote about in my story. So I still can talk about my faith. I can't challenge them too much. I got to be careful about how much I talk about God being the author of their story.
One thing that is really standing out to me as I hear you talk is, we can feel sometimes, I think, as Christians, like when you are in a situation like that and you can't specifically talk about it, maybe a little bit like you have like one arm tied behind your back a bit, but then God shows up and said, it's okay. I don't need both your hands untied. I can still work. You just need to love these people that are before you. You need to show salt and light. You need to be a kindness and a heart for them. I'll take care of the rest.
That is so true. And I think that's what's great that's one of the benefits of being a Christian in public schools, because I'm challenged to let my actions and my love for these kids show before I say anything. And so they know when they walk in the classroom, they're valued and that it's a safe place and that they can trust me. So yeah, you're right. I think that's a huge piece that Christians need to understand, is that we need to love first and demonstrate with our actions that these people in front of us matter and that they have value, no matter what perspective they have, no matter where they're coming from, no matter how broken their lives are, that they are loved and they're valued and they're seen first. And then say, hey, and there's this guy that his name's Jesus and he loves me like crazy and he loves you too.
With all of your awareness of God being their author, but yet you can't just always openly share your faith, how have you seen students turn toward God, even with those limitations? And I say that in quotes because to God, they're not.
Well, that's a great question. Yeah, they're not limitations. There is a young man here. I'll tell another story. This happened just a couple of weeks ago. But there's a young man, his name is Danny, and he had lost a friend to suicide. And he came into my class and he was a mess. And he usually comes in happy, excited. He's a life giver. This kid's really, really full of life all the time. And he came into my class upset and overwhelmed, obviously, about losing his friend. And I told him, he said, can I step outside? And I said, sure, you can take another walk. You want to take a walk and rest. And let me give you some background. This young man had gotten up in front of the class when I gave him a chance to share some words that mean something to them for extra credit. He got up in front of the class and shared some words that were something about make the most of your life and work hard and you're kind of on your own in the universe, that you have to make the most of your life. And he said that he had a atheist friend that he works with who was saying, yeah, this is all the life that you have is right now, and that you need to make the most of it now. And he said that this guy's words meant so much to him. And so we applauded and we said, that's exciting. Yeah, make the most of your life. Good job. But it was sort of sad for me to hear him obviously say that in front of us. But I never like condemn that or say, oh man, don't think that way. Or so we applauded him and we said, yeah, make the most of your life. And he sat down. So then fast forward later. So then he comes to my classroom. He's sad. His friend has died. And he's just overwhelmed. And so he takes a walk. And then he's gone for a couple of minutes. And then a math teacher comes back to my room. And she's also a believer in the public school. And she says, hey, this guy, he was sitting on the stairs, Danny, and he was very upset. But I sat with him for a while and just asked him how he's doing. He told me about his friend. And I gave him a hug. But he should be coming back in just a minute. And so I said, great. And she wanted to let me know that because she had a planning period. So she was out there and she saw him. So then she left and then he came back. Actually, no, she was still there and he came back and we're both there together. And then I said, I'm so sorry, Danny, with what you're going through. And then I gave him a hug. I said, can I give you a hug? And he said, sure. And I gave him a hug. And we walked back in and you could tell that it meant a lot to him that this math teacher had sat with him and that we were listening to him in the hallway for a little bit while the kids were working in the classroom. And then he came back in and there was a softness to his heart, during that class. And he lingered afterwards and just thanked me again and then walked out. Well, the next week I work with Young Life and there's this, I don't know if you guys have heard of Young Life, but it's a great organization that is basically a party with a purpose. They call it a party with a purpose where kids can come and have fun. And it's usually not in a church setting. And then they can hear something about Jesus in the midst of having fun and having community. So anyways, I would do this Young Life thing. And I said a week later, I said, Danny, you should come. And he came to Young Life and he had a blast and he was super excited about being there and was participating in the games and just had so much fun. And now he's signed up to go to camp, to go to Young Life camp. And so it's just cool to see him slowly begin to turn and you can see God working on him and drawing him close. So I'm praying for him and you guys can pray for him too, that he is able to definitely go to camp and raise the money to go. But just examples like that where you can see God using brokenness and hurt and in the midst of that, drawing kids to himself.
That's really awesome. I have something in my head I have said recently, which is God is an expert at finding that sheep and bringing them.
Amen. Yes, totally. Yeah. He leaves the 99 and goes for that one sheep and brings it back. Yeah.
And it's amazing too, because it doesn't matter what somebody's, it doesn't matter that in that moment, he doesn't know God. He doesn't know anything I don't know what he knows about him, but he doesn't know him. And he's talking to this atheist who doesn't also know him. And it doesn't matter because God's still near to the brokenhearted. He's brokenhearted and God's near, and he places him in the company of two Christian teachers. It reminds me of this moment in my life. My first husband had passed away when he was 38. He had a heart attack, and my daughter has a heart condition. She's had 8 open heart surgeries. And there was this one moment not long after my husband's death that we were in church, and I remember and my daughter was going to need another heart surgery within months. And so I remember being in that moment at a church and just looking around. And the one thing that stood out to me as I saw this little girl who was bebopping around church with her little pigtails flopping around as she was listening to the music and dancing along was the word God gave me was, I have placed believers everywhere. And I'm not only placing them, but I am raising them up. And so
Amen.
when you share this story about this young man, I think of you and your coworker who are the believers that God has placed everywhere. And I think of this young man, and we'll pray for his time at camp, because I think, and here's someone he's going to raise up, you know.
Amen. Amen. Yeah.
So
And Jenny,
beautiful.
thinking about you too, being in that church and seeing that little girl, you're saying you were that little girl, right? You were that little girl who was being seen and loved. Is that what you're saying?
No, there was a
Oh,
little girl she was so cute. If you could have seen her, she
right.
had pigtails like Rue in Monsters Incorporated cartoon, and she was just bouncing around she was so excited to like sing the praise and worship music with her parents. And I looked at her and she was probably 2. And I'm like, she doesn't know, she's a little child and she doesn't fully know yet. But my word, was she filled with the Spirit. And I'm like, she's going to be raised up, And then I just looked around the crowd and I was like, wow, all of these people are going out into different places today. And no matter where they go, they have an opportunity to be that light for someone and to do that. And, God's placing people everywhere to do that work. So it's just really remarkable that one, I think, gosh, you must be in such good alignment right now,
Oh,
with God and what his plan is for your life, that it's just, there's got to be a lot of peace in that.
well, I think people, and I was thinking that you were thinking that imagining yourself as that little girl, being surrounded by believers who are all around you, who can give you that freedom and that peace that that little girl felt and that love. And I think that's a powerful, and that may not be exactly what you're trying to say, that you're imagining yourself as that little girl, but that's a place where we are hit so hard when God shows us that we're seen. When we recognize, like you did feel seen in that church, when you felt like God was giving you that word, that you're surrounded by other believers, he's raising up believers. You felt seen in that church. And I feel like that's those moments when we know that God notices us and that he specifically is speaking to our hearts and wants us to see that we're not alone. Those are moments that move us and like strengthen our faith in such powerful ways. And then those are also the moments that are the turning points for people like Danny. He's got to eventually put it together that he was on those stairs and here comes a math teacher, and then somehow he's in this Christian English teacher's class, and then he gets invited to Young Life. Like, there's a God who's after him.
Yes, he is after him. That's amazing. Now, your book, can you tell us, like, what's the title? Where do we find it? What's the storyline? I'd love to hear more about it.
Right. So the book is right now the working title is No Random Life.
Mhm.
And it's ultimately about, God being the author of our story. On my website, when the first homepage, when you look at the homepage, these words dramatically come down and it says, your story has a plan, a purpose, and an author. Let's look for him together. And so this book is all about looking for God in the stories of our lives and seeing and celebrating him as the author. So noticing those details and noticing what he's doing, his handiwork, in all the parts of our stories, whether it's the symbolism or the character choices that he, where he brings in characters into our lives, different people in our lives, or the conflicts, even the hard things that we face, which we've all faced that are hard and painful, but seeing God in the conflicts and what he's doing with those conflicts and those difficulties. Just watching him take care of the details of our stories and celebrating those things. And so as I write about this, God being the author of our stories, I also tell my story as an English teacher and being in a public school. And I write about all the ways that God has demonstrated his faithfulness in using pieces of my story, the conflicts and the symbolism and the setting. And then I also put in there different authors that we study in class. And so I talk about how Steinbeck uses the woods in Of Mice and Men, and how he brings us back to the woods at the end of the story, and that God does the same thing with Peter's life. He starts off with a boat, and fishing, and then he comes all the way back at the end of the story where Peter's again in the boat fishing, and it ends there with that. And it's just powerful how God uses settings so powerfully in our lives to show us that he's near, and not only that, but just all the details, the symbolism. Like, I don't think we talk about symbolism enough in the church and among Christians, because symbolism is kind of vague, and it's something that only English teachers talk about, I think. But it's, man, God's a fan of symbols. If you look at rainbows and crosses and lambs, and it's not just symbolism of the Bible in the past, that God once did. He still uses symbols today in our lives in powerful ways. So I write about all the details and celebrating God. And I guess something I talk about a lot when I'm talking about the book is I talk about sunsets. And when we see a sunset, like the sunsets here in Colorado are gorgeous. You've got the sun setting behind the mountains, and the purples and the oranges, and the silhouette of the mountains are there. And those of us who believe in God, we look at that and we just think, man, God, you are so creative. You are so creative. It's beautiful what you can do with sunsets. And by the way, they're more beautiful if there's messiness, if there's clouds, and if there's, all this other stuff, which God uses the messiness to make things even more beautiful, which is incredible. But anyways, we look at those sunsets and we're in awe. The question that I ask people is how often do we look at our stories, the stories of our lives, and have that same kind of response, where we're just in awe of, man, God, look what you're doing with our stories, with the conflicts and the struggle, and with the people that you brought into my life, and the setting and where I am, and just look what you're doing. This is incredible to stand back and look at it. But I think God wants us to celebrate what he's doing with the symbolism and the character choices and the conflicts and the settings. He wants us to celebrate those things, just like we celebrate the oranges and the purples and the reds and the sunsets.
Yeah. That's incredible. Is your book available yet? I heard you say working title.
Right. It's a working title. I've finished it, but I'm still looking for a publisher. And I'm working with an editor who is fantastic. Her name's Karen, and she's just great. But I'm working with an editor, and it's pretty much done, but I'm just kind of perfecting it and trying to build an audience. So it's taking time, but I'm trusting God to see what he'll do with it.
Well, definitely looking forward to that. It sounds really beautiful, and like it's something that as you're talking about it, I feel excitement, I feel like, oh my gosh, I have to get my hands on this. I want to hear more. I want to know more. And that's a little bit like what a relationship with God's like, right? It's like, wait, tell me more. I want more.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
You get
I
a
think.
taste and, oh, go ahead.
What'd you say, Jenny?
I said you get a taste and it's like, I need more.
Oh yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. It's exciting for me. I can't wait to get it out there. And that's I really started with the book. I started writing the book, and then talked to somebody some professionals who are editors, and they said, hey, if you want to get your book out there, you need to build an audience. And so that's why I started writing the stories and telling stories about what God's doing in the classroom and in the hallways of my school. But actually, I think God all along, I mean, he's the author again, he's in control. All along, he wanted me originally to write these stories and to have this blog that I put out there, to use it kind of as a ministry. I think God's using it. So then eventually we get to the book, but it's interesting how we pursue something and we're going after something big, but really what God's doing is using all the time we're moving towards that goal. He's using all those things, all those pieces before we even get there. So.
Now, did you know all along that God was going to have you do that part of it, or did he reveal that later?
You mean the part of writing the stories?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely later. I'd been working on the book for a while, and then started talking with friends and talking with these editors I called in Denver, and I didn't know them. I just was calling around and trying to find someone to look at my book. And this editor said, what kind of a presence do you have online? And do you have any kind of social media? And I was completely offline at that point. I didn't have Facebook. I had nothing. And he said, you really need to get your stories out there, and you need to get it out there. What God's doing, and then let people see that and build an audience. And then you'll have an audience to send the book out to. So that's what I've been doing for the last maybe about 3 years. So yeah, this was not something I set out to do. The stories that I'm writing on my site.
But the book itself, was that something you knew before, or did you get that word later on too?
the book, the idea of writing the book came out of, it wasn't right away. Right when I started teaching, I wasn't thinking I'm going to write a book. I never wanted to write a book for a long time. And then just maybe the last 8 years, maybe about 8 years ago, I really felt, as I've been seeing God do things in the classroom, I felt, man, people need to know that the public schools are not just places where there's overcrowding and gang violence and fights and kids on cell phones and disrespect and all the stereotypes that people give public schools. I wanted people to see that there's a God who is in those public schools doing incredible things, because I think God loves to show up in messy places, right? He introduced Jesus. Jesus comes into the manger. It's a mess. There's animal smells and sounds, and it's hay, and it's not the ideal place. But that's where God introduces Jesus to the world. Like that's where Jesus comes into our lives. And so I think he's a big fan of messy places, and he likes to bring his beauty out of those messy places. And I've always felt, well, for the last few years, I've felt, man, people need to know that there's a God who's here, who's present, who's doing powerful, good things, and in a dark place like a public school can be.
Yeah, I like how your mind has gone there to tell stories. God's really spoken to you and led you and using you in that way. I think that's really awesome. I think it's also really awesome that you have an attitude that says, I'm limited in public school to an extent, but oh well, I guess there's nothing I can do. No, you are doing something, but also you have a website with stories, because that's a place you can openly share and invite people to go to. You thought of a way around, so to speak, to share light no matter what.
Amen. Yeah, exactly. Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, it's just neat how, and I didn't plan all the pieces. Like first I'll write a blog, and then I'll write a book, and then people will hear more about God being present in public schools. And it's just neat how, God faithfully puts in the pieces and uses different conversations with different people to make this blog happen, and this website, and then now the book.
And it's really neat too. I like how it works. It's so intricately woven together, our lives. Like we just can't even begin to find words to describe the vast, it's just huge. And so all the while all these kids and teachers and, parents are crossing your path year after year, and God's using you in their lives. He's also using them in your life to move forward with this message that he wants shared. And I like that yes, it is part of today's world that you have to have the online presence and all of that, but I like that that's part of it. Because do you know how many young kids are like, I'm going to go Google who my teacher is this year? I know my kids, when they went to college, it was like every single professor. Who are they? What are they about?
Yeah.
I have to know.
Right. Yeah.
So if somebody starts to Google you, they're going to find your website. And when they find your website, they're going to read the word of God.
Yeah.
That's right.
In this beautiful fashion of stories. And stories are incredibly powerful because that's what Jesus did. He told parables all the time because people relate to them.
Definitely. And I think that's something else that I like to put into my story, is that not only that Jesus is faithful and that he's present, but also that I'm broken, and that I desperately need him. And there are all these moments where I face my limits and I feel overwhelmed, and then he's there, he's present. I love the story of Jairus, whose daughter is very sick and she's probably going to die.
Yeah.
And he runs to Jesus and he says, Jesus, can you please come and heal my daughter? And he's a religious leader, so going to Jesus is kind of like don't do that. It's a no, because Jesus was like the opposition. He was the other side, and he's gathering all this attention, and they don't want him to have that. So, but he's desperate, right? He desperately needs hope. So he goes to Jesus and he says, can you come heal my daughter? And you guys know the story, but Jesus says, sure, I'll go. And so they start walking on this road to his house. And while they're walking, some man comes up and says, you know what? She's dead. And he says, don't bother the teacher anymore. Don't bother him anymore. And Jesus turns to him immediately and he says, he ignores what the guy says. And he turns to him and he says, don't be afraid, just believe. And they keep walking down that road. And then he sees Jesus do this miracle and bring his daughter back to life. And I feel like there are so many kids that and so many people in life, not just kids, but adults and everybody, all of us, we're walking along that road of life, and this discouragement comes along and it's overwhelming. And we face our own limits and our own brokenness and desperation. And we were not meant to walk that road alone. We were not meant to walk by ourselves. And like you were saying earlier, Jenny, there are believers all around us that who offer community. But even more importantly is that Jesus is there walking with us. Mm-hmm. And when the discouragement comes up and we hear that voice that says, give up, don't bother the teacher anymore. This is hopeless. He's there and he says, don't be afraid, just believe. And we keep walking. And I feel like that hope that we have to offer as believers, having him walk with us, is so powerful to offer to the world. And for these students of mine who go through every day, who see the stories online or whatever, or who hear about Young Life or Young Life Camp, and they see the joy that I have at 7:15 in the morning, that is only because of Jesus in me. They recognize there's someone walking with him on that road. He's got hope. And I can tell these kids, and I told the story of Jairus last Monday night to the Young Life Club, but I can tell these kids, like, we're not meant to walk this road alone. We're meant to walk it with a God who loves us, who's there with us. And that's really what my stories kind of communicate that, I think, in a lot of ways, because I face so many moments where that voice creeps up and says, give up, or this is too much. You can't do this. And I want to give up. And then there's Jesus next to me who says, don't be afraid, just believe. And this book even, like, I was told the other day that by an agent who's a literary agent who's a friend of mine. He said, you really need 10,000 subscribers in order to get your book published by a traditional publishing company. And that's very, very far from where I am right now. And so that's the discouragement again that says, just give up. But Jesus is there and he's like, nope, I've called you to this. We're walking on this road. Just believe. Don't be afraid. Just believe. Keep going. And so he's there. He's faithful, and I'm not going to give up hope.
Amen. Well, I'm looking at the time and I'm like, oh no, I don't want to stop. I want to ask more. No, but oh my goodness, you have just an incredible mission and an incredible heart. And, we are going to be excitedly looking for that book release when that comes along.
Yeah, I can't wait.
I know that I believe wholeheartedly God will make that happen, however, is the best way for it to get into the hands of people. And so great work you're doing. And if people want to find you, what's your website? Where should they look you up?
Yeah, great question. Thank you for asking that. If people are interested in getting the stories and they want to read these stories, I send them out every couple of weeks, every 2 weeks. And then obviously they'll hear about the book when it comes. But the best place to go is go to my website, which is ErinAhnfeldt.com, ErinAhnfeldt.com. So ErinAhnfeldt.com. And then if they do that, they on my front page of my site, it says, your story has a plan, a purpose, and an author. Let's look for them together. They can click where it says join me, or they can go to the bottom where I offer my stories, and they can click on that to get the stories. And then if they sign up, they get a little write-up that I did that is called six secrets to seeing God in your story. 6 secrets to seeing God in your story. And they're just practical ways to see God at work in the story of your life. And so I'll send that out too if they sign up.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And we just look forward to what's coming next.
Well, thank you for having me. Well, I think one of my favorite things about doing these podcasts is meeting great people and seeing what God's doing in their lives. So it's great meeting you guys, and just an honor to be a part of this show today.
Thank you. He was just amazing. I love his ability to see God in the details.
Me too. And I love how focused he is on listening to and watching for how God is authoring his own life and how excited he is to be a part of helping other people realize how God is writing the story of their life too.
Yeah, I mean, he truly is a gift, I think, to the field of education for more
Yeah.
reasons than just one. Like I said during the interview, oh my goodness, who wouldn't want to have this be one of the teachers in their
Yeah.
child's high school? You know,
Yeah.
his understanding of a sense of community, his heart to want to show love to everyone, his ability to just kind of meet people where they're at.
He is someone who is really shining his light to other people, the light of God.
Thank you for listening to That's the Hashtag Truth. Remember to catch new episodes every other week on your favorite podcast channels. To learn more, visit us at jennymuscatell.com or muscatellministries.com.